Welcome everyone to our Red Ant Forum on the Socialist Campaign for US President. Particularly welcome to Claudia Dela Cruz. We're very grateful that you're joining us today. Very lucky to be able to hear directly from you. So Claudia is running for president with the PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation in the US. She's a long-time organizer. She's been the pastor of her home church for 8 years, co-executive director and founder of the People's Forum in New York. I had the pleasure of hearing you speak last year at an Amilcar Cabral forum at UCLA. So that was really great. I've been following their campaign, as I'm sure many other people here have been. So we've organized this forum because it's very important for us in Australia, I believe, to follow closely to understand really the political situation in the US. It's common to hear PSL members talk about organizing in the US as organizing in the belly of the beast. And really the global struggle against capitalism, of course, requires his struggle in the heart of global capitalism, which is the United States. So a bit about the campaign. So currently the US basically has two major parties which are united in their support for capitalist hegemony, I guess. On the one side, there's the Harris campaign, which is seemingly constantly supporting Israel, constant diplomatic cover, support for genocide. There's increasingly more apparent nonsense of tirelessly working for a ceasefire deal. The Democrats constantly moving towards the right. I think recently they've had endorsements by people from the Reagan administration, by Dick Cheney, and they've been promoting this as if this were a good thing. An example of the discourse moving further and further to the right for the Democrats is the discussion around a border wall. That discussion has changed dramatically over the last 10 years. And really, I just feel like they're mass enablers of the far right. Kamala has called for America to have the most lethal fighting force in the world. So this is a party completely committed to US capitalist domination of the world. On the other hand, there's the Trump campaign, which over the past week or so has just degenerated into pure insanity. I think maybe it has always been this crazily run, but I think the recent lies about immigrants have been, for me, next level and really horrendous. And there's this broader push to use immigrants as the scapegoat for all of the country's problems. There have been recent attempts to block the campaign, the Claudia Karina campaign, from the ballot in Georgia. This was a process initiated by the Democratic Party. So they're feeling pressure about losing the progressive vote, so they're turning to anti-democratic tactics. But really, their campaign has exploded. We're seeing it on social media. I'm sure in person on the ground in the US, you're feeling how big it is. So the campaign for president, but also broader, the movement that the PSL is building, I think is really inspiring, not just to US citizens and the solutions that socialism can provide in America, but also globally in terms of anti-imperialism. The campaign is currently on the ballot or has official write-in status in 34 states. I believe this number is correct, but you can correct me later if not. The final state count is expected to be more than this. And again, this is significantly higher than the last PSL run for president. So I would like to say, before any votes are even made or counted, this is very impressive and reflects a tremendous amount of work done across the country. So with that, I'll pass on to you, Claudia, to speak for maybe 20 to 25 minutes. Then we'll follow that with a general discussion. And I'll take maybe one or two questions at a time. And people can make comments, questions. You can also leave comments in the chat. Otherwise, you can put your hand up and I will take it from there.
Thank you so much, Hugo. And thank you, I see Dennis and obviously Sam, for reaching out and inviting me to be in this forum with you all. Again, I want to apologize for not having been able to be here before, but I heard amazing things from Karina. She was really excited coming off this call. And maybe it would make sense to share a little bit more about the party and myself. Also, a little bit more in terms of the political situation here. And goals and updates on the campaign. So if you're okay with that, then I'll share some information about the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which has been around for 20 years this year. some of our elders in the party, or the ones that have had more life and struggle, as they would say, have been doing this work for many, many decades, way before the party was actually formed. And the party was formed in the context of the anti-war movement of 2003, 2004. And a lot of these comrades I met doing anti-imperialist work, not being part of the party, about 19 years ago. Interestingly enough, I met them in Venezuela during the World Youth Festival. I had the opportunity of being raised practically by folks who engaged in the practice of liberation theology in the United States. I was born in the poorest congressional district in the United States, which means that 42% of the people who live in my district are living in or below poverty. We have high levels of unemployment. We have lack or no access to healthcare. We have a huge issue when it comes to housing. And the South Bronx provides the distribution of food all across the city of New York, and yet has the highest levels of food inaccessibility, which means that we live in a food desert. And that is a huge contradiction of capitalism. We have the markets that are able to nourish the rest of the city, and yet we don't have access to fresh produce. So that is a community that I come from. And so inherently, there are many questions surrounding poverty. There are many questions surrounding a city that is the wealthiest city in the United States and maybe across the globe. It's the heart of Wall Street. And you have a community, or many communities in many different boroughs, who are barely making it. And all these questions drove me to be part of a community, a faith community that, again, practices liberation theology, and introduced me to the revolutions of Cuba, to the revolutions in Venezuela, to the revolution of Nicaragua. And I engaged in the process of learning about these revolutions, not only theoretically, but also visiting these different projects. And it was in 2005 in Venezuela, in the World Youth Festival, that I met the party. They had a book that was called Why Socialism, which was reprinted this year. And I said, I can't believe y'all are coming from New York City. I'm from New York, and you're a socialist? There's not a lot of young socialists in New York that I like anyway or look like me. And we started having this conversation back and forth in the bus about the different tendencies of socialism that exist in the United States. And I was bought. I was like, you're anti-imperialist. You're really about building a revolutionary movement. And you're calling yourself the Party for Socialism and Liberation, almost as a declaration of faith that at some point in history, people will be ready for socialism. You got me. And since then, 19 years, I've been in relationship to the party. I actually became a party member in 2020, but a lot of my organizing since 2005 was connected to party orientation, whether it was reading their newspaper, whether it was talking to the leadership, whether it was in conversation with them. I was part of the periphery of activists and organizers that built a relationship with the party, understanding that a party was necessary, but I wasn't ready at that particular moment. The party continued to grow. The party is now present across the United States in 92 cities, some of which I've had the very, very rich opportunity to meet during this campaign trail. I think I've been one of the luckiest folks in the Central Committee that has had the opportunity to see the breadth and the depth of the party. And I have to say that the membership of the militants of the Party for Socialism and Liberation, I'm very proud to say, are working class people. They're students. There are workers in Amazon. There are union organizers. There are folks that are engaged in the struggle against police brutality, folks that have been engaged in work for immigrant rights, reproductive health, teachers, people who come from work And as soon as they got out of work, they get into political meetings, whether they be to organize or plan a mobilization or organize a drive of somehow in relationship to a campaign that they have in a local space. Working class people who are committed to the construction of socialism in the belly of the beast. And there is nothing more inspiring than that. And so we are, again, 20 years, working class character. We have participated in the elections before. A lot of our comrades have had the opportunity to either be the VP or the presidential candidate, but the most known person is Gloria La Riva, who actually ran her campaign before this one in 2020 during COVID and was out there organizing, mobilizing, meeting with branches, meeting with folks that were interested in building branches. And nothing that we have actually achieved as a party in the electoral terrain could possibly be a thing had not been for the different interventions in different moments in time. In 2020, obviously, we were experiencing COVID. People were not, not everyone had the privilege to stay at home. There were a lot of essential workers who lost their lives. There were a lot of people, working class people, who did not have access to the most necessary and basic health needs. And so we had a huge neglect on behalf of the state at that moment. And still our comrades were out in the streets organizing and mobilizing. It was also a period in which the Bernie campaign was killed for the second time at the DNC in April 2020. And Biden was chosen as the candidate because everyone thought that somehow we needed to gather around Biden and build a coalition to prevent fascism from happening. And a lot of social movements and a lot of people who were out in the streets protesting the neglect of the government during COVID. And then later on, the assassination of George Floyd by Minneapolis police abandoned the streets. A whole movement was co-opted. And people were basically driven and funneled into electoral politics to back up Biden. Many of those folks who were surrounding the Bernie campaign, who were already disenchanted by the Democrats and their continued betrayal of our class, actually left politics altogether, or some of them. We had a huge flock of folks coming from that moment in time in support of Bernie's campaign come into our party because they were completely breaking with the two-party system. As Hugo very well explained, historically, the biggest forces around elections or electoral politics have been one party with two different names. One party with two different names. One party that belongs to the ruling class that is two fragments of the ruling class being represented either with the Democrats or the Republicans, but they both belong to the ruling class. And I think the debate that I think Hugo also referred to when he said, Kamala's promise to having the most lethal military force, which she said in the DNC, and she also repeated in the debate, are proof of how committed to U.S. imperialism and capitalism these parties are. And so in 2020, there were huge numbers of people who actually divorced themselves from the two-party system. And we received a whole bunch of young people who were ready to construct this party that we are building. And we saw the highest numbers of folks that were applying to become members of the party. I also have to share that as a Marxist-Leninist organization, folks can apply to become members of the party. Not everyone will actually be accepted, which is a thing. We have a membership we know. We have a membership that we are investing in to develop as cadre of our organization. We're very serious about political education. We're really serious about building the infrastructure of our party so that is effective and functional. That is not something that is just there looking pretty and because it sounds pretty and revolutionary. We walk and we build, and that is something that that we have learned in the course of 20 years, and it has proven to be effective, knowing that unfortunately a lot of the forces that were there 20 years ago when we built the party are not there anymore. A lot of organizations, a lot of our left organizations have imploded or have fragmented. Many things have happened in the course of 20 years, but the Party for Socialism and Liberation continues to be here, growing. And the concept of continuity is very important to us. And so we have different tiers of leadership. I myself, I'm 43, I'm in the second tier of leadership, but there's a leadership that is older, and there is a huge amount of leaders that are between the ages of 24 and 35. And now we have another group of leadership that is coming in that is even younger. We don't know what to do with the high school students, for example, that are coming through the campaign and are saying, well, we can't vote, but we want to organize. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we engage with younger people who obviously would need to have some level of consent from parents. So that's another discussion for another day. But we do have, a culture of continuity, which means that we plug in young people into leadership roles and walk with them as we develop them as cadre. And I think that that's a huge basis of our work that is sometimes not taken up as seriously by political organizations of the left in the United States. And, picking up back the question of electoral politics, we started this campaign, as I was mentioning earlier, and we didn't have a clue that October 7th was going to happen. I don't think the world did. We started the campaign September 7th. We had been talking a lot about how we were going to launch it, the outreach component of it, how many states we were going to reach. And we've actually exceeded all of the thoughts and ideas we potentially had when we started. Initially, we said, we're going to be in 15 states. That was the initial thought, because we were thinking about what we had done in the past. So we weren't necessarily starting with the ambition, right? And then we had comrades say, well, we can get on the Georgia ballot. Actually, we're going to fight for this. We're going to do it. And it was our comrades in the Georgia branch, the Atlanta branch primarily, that said, we're going to go out and we're going to petition and we're going to show you that we're going to get on the ballot. And the expected number of signatures you're supposed to get for Georgia is 7,500 signatures of folks who are registered to vote. Our comrades in Georgia collected over 17,000 signatures in Georgia. That is huge. They didn't double it. They went beyond doubling the numbers. 17,000 plus signatures. In Pennsylvania, the same thing. Comrades said, we're going to fight for it as a swing state. We're going to make it happen. And they went out. Ohio. So states that historically we haven't necessarily been able to meet the requirements of signatures, we had the strength of comrades in branches, but also thousands of volunteers across this country that took on the task of getting signatures. So at the moment, we are in 21 states and 19 write-ins. That is 40 states. That's a huge accomplishment for an explicitly socialist campaign. Because another thing that I must say is that we have a history of third parties in this country. It's not like third parties don't exist. Third parties exist, but an explicitly socialist campaign is the PSL campaign. The one that is saying we need a complete reorganization of society. We need a complete redistribution of wealth. We need to end US imperialism. We need to end capitalism and seize the top 100 companies. This is the type of idea, the type of politic, the type of vision for the future that we're putting out. And the reception of young people, old people all across the country when we go into these communities is, I think I'm a socialist, because that's exactly what we need. There was a New York Times report that came out not long ago, probably like 6 months ago. It was spring that said the majority of people, 70% of the people in the United States, believe that the economy needs radical change. And 13% of those 70 said that the whole system needs to be dismantled. That's huge in the United States of America and the belly of the beast. And this is a side of the US that is unknown to the rest of the world. That there is such a huge group of people in this country that are really fed up with the economic and political system, and that are beginning to understand US imperialism as it relates to domestic issues. October 7th hits, and the PSL did what we do. We have a political line in our program that says that we are for the total liberation of Palestine, and that we believe that there should be an immediate end to the illegal occupation of the state of Israel. And we didn't have to convene our leaders across the country to come to the conclusion that we needed to be out in the streets. People knew exactly what to do on October 8th. And across the country, there were hundreds of protests in solidarity with Palestine, in which the party played a key role. And so even before we had an opportunity to discuss many things or even launch the campaign, we actually didn't launch the campaign or didn't do the launch of the campaign till February this year, even though we had started the campaign September 7th, because we had been in the streets, we had been organizing, we had been mobilizing. Karina and myself are militants of the party, so we have responsibilities in addition to this electoral role that we're playing. And we're workers and we're moms. And so we took the task of being out there with the people since this began. And what that did was create a face of visibility for the campaign that we did not expect. People were creating material and content on TikTok that we didn't even know existed. People were tagging us, telling us, you need to be on TikTok, you need to be on Twitter, and so we started creating some sort of mechanism internally. And since then, a lot of things have happened kind of as we have been walking this path, in which we have created an infrastructure around communications. We have created an infrastructure around, how to organize our states. Now we have state chairs for the campaign, which we didn't have before. And that only happened because in January, when we checked the registrations for volunteers, we had over 6,000 people willing to volunteer for the campaign, whether it was canvassing, petitioning, creating content. And again, these things are huge for a relatively unorganized population, which is the working class, that are not members of the party. And so what that made us kind of sit down for a minute and realize and take into consideration that people are not necessarily simply coming out for solidarity with Gaza or solidarity with Palestine. People have been able to make the connections between what is currently happening in the United States in terms of the day-to-day and what is happening in Gaza. And that has mobilized students in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. That has mobilized workers in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. People who have been developing campaigns against police brutality are coming into these protests and saying the same forces that are being, the ones killing our young men, our young Black working class men in the streets, are being trained by the IOF. And so they're making all of these connections, and you see a level of re-energizing of the movement that we haven't seen. And I'm not even going to dare say in decades. I think we haven't seen at all. It's a whole different context in which the level of consciousness has grown very rapidly towards anti-imperialism and the desire of doing something that is transformative. Now, how does this impact the political scenario in the United States? There's the uncommitted votes that come up, which are the base of the Democratic Party, that are against genocide. Not anti-imperialist, but against genocide. A lot of folks who come from Arab communities, Palestinians, who have denounced the complicity of the Biden-Harris administration with Netanyahu. But they continue to be part of the Democratic Party. You have outside of that campaigns like Abandon Biden, now Abandon Harris, which basically have made a commitment out of having the Democratic Party lose and deepening the crisis in a way that there should or would be some sort of ceasefire agreement, or at least some sort of negotiation that could be beneficial and could end the genocide in Gaza. And then you have third parties. So it's the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which is us. You have the campaign with Cornel West. You have Jill Stein, which is very notable. The Green Party has a base, and it's a mass party. So it's a huge umbrella of different politics. And you have the Libertarians. So the third parties are not little. Actually, this year, we've seen the most challenges that we have ever seen in the ballot access arena in history. There are at least 8 challenges that are being presented, being led by the Democratic Party, because they're scared to lose this election, because they know that the people are aware of just how much they have collaborated in the genocide that is currently taking place in Gaza. And people are unwilling to vote for war criminals. So what does the Democratic Party do? They shift from Biden, not because Biden is a genocidal maniac, not because he is unable to put a sentence together, but because he makes imperialism look weak. And there is something that the ruling class does not like, is appearing to be weak even when they are weak. Because the reality is that they are being weakened on the international front and they're being weakened in the domestic front. And so the best bet for them was to play the card of identity politics, which is a card that we've seen played. We saw it in 2008 with Obama. The cooptation of the anti-war movement of that moment, the cooptation and bribery of the working class that had just been hit with an economic crisis. And people also saw the betrayal of Obama, bombing 8 countries, leaving office as the deporter in chief with the highest number of deportations, and a complete disregard for the police brutality that was happening under his watch. So people understand that betrayal, the bailing out of the banks and not the people. But identity politics was played heavy there. He was made a cultural icon before he became a president. And how does that happen? You had a lot of musicians and hip hop artists, and everything that had to do with Black culture was weaponized against the people. And something very similar is what they're attempting to do right now with Kamala Harris, where you see all the memes and it's, you voting for Joy as if Joy didn't have an economic and political base, falling off a coconut tree. I know you've seen the memes and all these different crazy vibes things. And I'm sure people outside of the United States, as someone who has roots outside of the United States, we can't conceive that is the way that the so-called empire does politics. It is ridiculous. It is disgusting. And it's a serious disrespect to working class people. And I feel and think, and in conversations with folks outside in communities that are not apathetic to politics, but are apathetic to the ruling class 2-party system, you hear this. They were not talking to us because in the United States, we still have the same minimum wage we had in 2009, which is $7.25. That is a federal minimum wage. In Jackson, Mississippi, which is where I came from not long ago, which is basically one of the poorest states. Mississippi is one of the poorest states in the country. It would take one person 86 hours a week to earn enough money to have a 2-bedroom apartment. 86 hours a week to be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at $7.25, which is the minimum wage. Something that neither Trump or Harris mentioned, but they did talk to AIPAC. They did signal to AIPAC when they were both fighting over who loves Israel the most. They were signaling to the military contractors when they were talking about building the most lethal military force or strengthening NATO. They were not talking to the people. Trump is dangerous, and it's something that we constantly talk about. But Project 2025, which is the project that has been kind of released by the Heritage Foundation, a lot of the advisors of Trump worked in building that project, is not a new project. It's a project that has been underway since 1982. It's a project of the ruling class, not only Trump, of Democrats and Republicans. And so the fear-mongering towards the people has been, well, this is going to be worse because he is a fascist. But the Democrats forget that people have history. People remember. The reality is that in the last 20 years, the Democrats have held the majority of time in the presidency. Bill Clinton, Obama, 8 years, Biden and Harris administration. There's really only been 8 years of Republicans. And Trump continued a lot of the migration laws that the Obama administration started. And this Biden and Harris administration has also been very, very aggressive and brutal against immigrants. To the point that rather than signing an executive order to end the military funding and the weapons being sent to Israel, Biden signs an executive order to eliminate and end any type of support to refugees. Are folks following me? So their political agenda, the agenda of the Democrats, has moved further and further and further to the right since 1984. So to say that there is a difference between Republicans and Democrats is to give them too much leeway. When you have someone like Kamala Harris say, well, we're going to implement this tax project or this tax program and increase the taxing for the wealthiest. And then you go back in history and you look at what the tax program was for Ronald Reagan, and you notice it's the same program. There is no difference. When you see the migration of Republicans into the Democratic Party because they don't agree with just how rude and how open and how raw Trump is, not because they disagree necessarily with his politics, but just because he's unrefined. And they come to the Democratic Party because this is a better way of maintaining people oppressed and exploited without them actually rousing up. We have to have a sense of dignity. And the campaign, the Vote Socialist 2024 presidential campaign that the PSL is presenting is precisely about that. It's about reclaiming a history that has been attacked for decades, from the Red Scare to McCarthyism, through the development of nonprofits as well and philanthropy, which were created precisely to keep people appeased and not allow for movements that had a revolutionary character to develop. All of these things. Our task, we believe, as socialists, as anti-imperialists, is to intervene in every space. And so we approach this electoral campaign, this Vote Socialist 2024 campaign, as an opportunity to uplift the demands of the people and also provide a political instrument, because we cannot continue to say we got to oppose this one party with two names without providing people with an option that actually reflects their values, their principles, or at the very least engages them in a conversation with what we can create in a socialist society. And that is exactly what we're doing. And so we've been across the country, we've been in conversations with rooms of hundreds of people. We've been going to many communities, and there's an opportunity to speak to our people in terms that the liberals always tell us we shouldn't speak to our people, which is very clearly our people understand politics more than we would ever think. When I had the opportunity to go to South Carolina and meet with a community of people that have the highest rates of people who are living there with diabetes, that have had their limbs cut off because of lack of access to healthcare. And I say to them, this could be preventable. You didn't have to get your limbs cut off. And actually, Cuba has developed a medicine that can avoid people getting their limbs cut. And the United States has denied us the opportunity to having access because we have a blockade. And people's response is, we need to get to have a relationship with Cuba where people could live. It's our people understand, but the idea, the politic, the practice of the Democratic Party is worse than the Republicans, because what they are there to do is to prevent people from having radical ideas, from having radical practices, from believing and building the confidence that working class people should have to fight for everything that they deserve. The Democratic Party is not there to move a progressive agenda. They are there precisely to become an obstacle for any type of progressive agenda. And we saw that with, we don't support Bernie. We've seen, and we have seen, but a lot of social movements were surrounding that campaign. There was a potential there. And the Democratic Party decided that they would rather have that campaign die and have Trump win at that moment than anything else. They were not going to back it up. Instead, they gave us Biden, who we've seen how he's operated. And so I think that there's a lot of more clarity in our people's perception of what is happening currently when they see that the United States Congress can sign off $26 billion to continue to fund genocide. And it only takes $20 billion to eradicate homelessness in this country. They see where their priorities are. They rather sign a bill to continue to pay for genocide that's $26 billion than eliminate homelessness, which is affecting over 500,000 people in this country. And people are asking the right questions. Why are we in debt? Why are we a society that has to indebt itself to be able to live? The two highest reasons for people being indebted in this country is healthcare. We don't have access to healthcare, and yet when people go to an emergency room, they're billed thousands of dollars that they can't pay because obviously there's no way to do so. And we have high debts in households that accumulated are over $17 trillion nationwide. With healthcare and credit card debt, people can't afford to buy the most essential goods because there's price gouging that's happening. And so when Kamala stands there and says, I have a plan, I have a plan, I have a plan, and my plan is an opportunity economy, which is not different from the type of opportunity economy that we have now, an opportunity to a very few, while the majority of people don't have access to that opportunity. She's not singling out to the people. She's singling out to the corporations that signed the checks for congressmen, congresswomen, and herself, that she is not going to do much for the people, that the opportunity economy that has always been there will continue to be there. And so I think that people are at a moment where they're having a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions. And there's enough accumulated history for us to be able to tap into and say, this two-party system isn't working out for us. And they're scared. They're so scared that they have put over $100 million. That's the correct. over $100 million into a fund to be able to fight and challenge third parties off the ballot. Only people who are scared allocate $100 million into a fund to fight to get third parties off the ballot. And we're giving this fight right now. We're being challenged in Georgia. And again, it was the Democrats. It was not necessarily the Republicans that are putting this fight. We're being challenged in Pennsylvania as well. Not the Republicans. The Democrats are leading the charge. Because again, even though they talk so much about wanting to defend democracy, it is the most undemocratic party of the two. One lets us know really, really clear that they're the enemy of the people, which are the Republicans. They have no filter. They let us know exactly who they are. But as Malcolm X would say, the Democrats are like the fox. They will smile at you, but they have the same intent of having their flesh in their teeth. And so it's something that we are coming into consciousness, I think, collectively. The attacks on students all across this country, that we're simply demanding an end to genocide, that we're hit hard by all these colleges administrations, some of them who are still facing challenges to go back into school, and some of them are being, even banned, or all of these different things have revealed also just how much money, wealth, billionaires, APAC, which is one of the biggest PACs that is lobbying hard for the colonial state of Israel, just how much of their interests are defended by the politicians all across this country at all levels. And so this direct confrontation with the state is allowing people to understand that there needs to be a change. And the Democrats are most definitely scared. I'm sure the Republicans are as well, the ruling class of this country. I think we are in a moment where we are also, and have, as the working class, have developed a sense of understanding how to use social media as a weapon. So there's a lot of independent coverage of manifestations and protests. There's a lot of independent coverage of what's happening not only in Gaza, but what's happening in Congo, what's happening in Sudan, what's happening in Haiti. A lot of people that have had the capacity to counteract any type of narratives of vilifying Venezuela. So we're living currently in a very, very strong stage of the battle of ideas. We're living in a very strong stage of the deepening of consciousness. And I think we are also signaling through the campaign, and I would say just in general from social movements and political organizations, that regardless of whoever wins November 5th, the struggle will be intensified, because they have already started attacking some of the organizations that exist, that are revolutionary, that have socialist ideas, that have socialist practices in politics. They are even attacking progressive organizations. And so regardless of who wins, whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, we're going to be definitely living an intensified moment of struggle. And obviously, when that happens internally, it also happens externally. And so we see the expansion of war in the Middle East. We see exactly just how committed the US imperialist forces are to the continued expansion of NATO. They are not seeing any end in sight for the war in Ukraine, because they are willing to allow Ukraine to fight to the last Ukrainian to be able to expand NATO and continue to push this war against Russia and China. And so we are going to go into a territory where the beast, the US imperialist beast, it is definitely fighting for its life, and we have to get ready. And so when we go into these different communities, our ask is not necessarily for folks to vote for us. Our ask is for folks to get politically organized. Our ask is for folks that are students to build student organizations. When we go into spaces where workers are, you need to be able to build a union. And if you're in a community, you need to start building some sort of mass organization in that community. And the party exists to bring all those different struggles together. And so we will be here. We were here before November 5th, and we're going to be here after. And I think that message is a real message that people take to heart. and understand that we have never gotten anything from our enemies without a fight. And so we have to fight to be able to see the transformation that we want. And I'll stop there, but I think part of the hopeful piece of the campaign is that we're not selling people dreams. This is not about selling people dreams. This is about working towards a socialist future in the now together. But if we can and we don't have the ability to do that, then we can be hopeful about a future.
Thank you so much. That was really excellent. Yeah, everyone's clapping.
Thank you.
How much time do you have available for questions? Like when do we need to let you go?
Listen, I'm here and I'm drinking water. So you tell me.
Okay.
I probably like about 15 minutes if that's okay with you all, just so that I can check
Yeah.
on my kid.
Okay. Well, maybe before we get into questions, I'll just promote now that so we have an upcoming Vijay Prashad tour. So Vijay Prashad is a Marxist historian, journalist, and writer. He's coming to Australia between October 29 and November 7. Sydney, Canberra, Melbourne, Perth. There's going to be public lectures, teach-ins, workshops, more. So I'll add the link to the tour into the into the chat now, like the website page with the tour. So you can register for free for the events through the website, like through Humanitix, but you'll get that link through the website. So I'll add that there as well. And then the next announcement is that we have our upcoming national conference that's happening on the 7th and 8th of December. So that will be the next big thing that we promote. And if you're interested, I'll add another link into the chat now. And if you're new and haven't been involved in anything before, you can message either Nandini and Brendan or Sam on the chat, or you can go to this link that I've just sent now. So I think that's out of the way for all like the announcements that I've had to make. Now I guess we'll go into questions or comments. If anyone wants to raise their hand or type in the chat, I guess that's how I'll take them, and I'll take maybe 2 at a time. Okay, we'll go Nandini and Brendan and then Barry.
Hi, Claudia. Thanks so much. I am interested to know, at the very end, you're talking about kind of asking people to form unions or student groups. What is the PSL's, I guess, relationship between those kinds of mass organizations? Like, how do you, I guess, have a positive influence while retaining autonomy? Like, what's kind of your, how do you manage that? And also,
So we have comrades that are student organizers in different universities. We have comrades that are in the labor movement, and we have committees. And so even if folks are not part of the party, there is a certain level of militancy that is connected to those movements and is organizing in those spaces. And there's a periphery. So there's the militants and then there's the periphery. We have a relationship with the periphery. I was in the periphery of the party for a long time, but still in relationship to political analysis, political questions, and even in terms of mobilizing the folks that I was working with to participate in party events and participate in, I was kind of the bridge. And that relationship happens with folks that are in those spaces in leadership and organizing. And so that's the type of relationship that we have. That does not mean that we give them orientation as a party, but we do collaborate. So we have an infrastructure already. We know how to build signs. We know how to develop mass outreach, materials. All these different things are put in order of or in service of organizers. And that is a relationship. We meet, we work in coalition. And so if there's materials that's developed, it's developed with both logos. We establish discussions that allow us to get clarity in how to approach a certain moment in time. And so the relationship is one of collaboration with those that are in the periphery, and with our militants is one of orientation.
I'm actually going here in Australia. One of the big central political campaigns is around the military alliance called AUKUS, the Australia, UK, USA military alliance, which is resulting in Australia purchasing nuclear submarines from the USA. And this means that Australia, for the next, God knows how many decades, is going to be supplying the United States with hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, we're turning our national economy into an ATM, into just a bank outlet for the military-industrial complex of the United States, and this is all in the service of making war on China. This is just plain good old-fashioned racist war against China. I'm just wondering, to what extent are people in the United States even aware of this? This is a really big question here in Australia, but right now the Prime Minister of Australia is sleeping over in Joe Biden's private residence in Wilmington, and they're talking war. You know, they're having these big, long, private conversations where they're talking war. You know. And I'm just wondering, are people in the United States even aware of the stuff that's going on? Yeah.
I think that's a great question, mostly because there's such a blockade on information. There's so many mechanisms of distraction in the United States that there is the possibility of a small group of people that know about these things because they stay in tune with international news, and because these are the things that interest and move them. Obviously, the party, other political organizations that are very much against the war machine and the military-industrial complex are aware of these things. Yet we have a huge task of political education with our communities. We have a huge task in being able to bring that information into spaces in which people are suffering and can make, again, the connection between this economy of war, because that's what it is, that is being globalized, because it's not only Australia. I mean, if you think about the different alliances that the United States makes with other countries, is precisely extracting resources, money for the purpose of war and the purpose of hegemony. And so I think that there's a lot of work to be done. There's not a lot of people who know about AUKUS. There's not a lot of people who know about NATO. They mention it in TV as if this, it's this thing, but ordinary people don't know what it is and don't know what its function in. We have the Southern Command here. And when I say the Southern Command, they have no clue what the Southern Command is. And if they go on YouTube and they look for the Southern Command, which is basically the equivalent of NATO, AFRICOM, and all these other instruments of war across the globe, people will find on YouTube that this is basically an exchange program that fortifies, national security in other countries. And that is complete bullshit. Like, it's not that. That's not what it does. And so what the left needs to do is serious mass organizing. We need to be able to provide that level of information in a way that our people are, one, able to understand, and two, able to make the connection. We don't necessarily have, I think it's strengthening now, an anti-war sentiment that hasn't been here for decades. It's just the resurgence of an anti-war sentiment. And so we need to take the opportunity now to intervene with this knowledge, with this new information, and build campaigns around it, which is something that we've also lost, not because we've wanted to, but because of the different ways in which the state has intervened and dismantled movements and organizations. I think now is the time for us to do that, because people are definitely in a space of wanting to learn more and wanting to make connections. And so I appreciate the question, and it's a task for us in the belly of the beast to take that on.
Thanks, Hugo, and thanks, Claudia, for the presentation. I think that was, I found that really, really useful, and I liked, I guess, how you started to give us a bit of a picture of how the political situation's developing, particularly, I guess, how the consciousness of working people has developed and started to develop, I guess, a lot more and very some radical changes or important changes in that. And, it was very interesting to sort of hear how the PSL's been involved with that and the struggle, I guess, to consolidate and build the party organization, you know, in relation to some of those changes and contribute to them. And I guess it's just, how do you put it? Like, it's just sort of whet my appetite, really. Like, I feel, you know, everything you're saying, like, I kind of consider, I guess, from here and from our point of view of trying to build up a revolutionary socialist organization in Australia. And it's like, well, we kind of almost need to have a correspondent in the United States. And, you know, we can't call on you or Karina to come and give us updates, what's happening every week, and keep on top that way. But I guess one thing would be just if there's any particular documents, I guess, that the PSLs develop, because, you know, it seems like really you're giving us the taste of the PSL's analysis of the situation and how it's developing. And I found that really useful. So if there's some more materials that, you know, we can look at and start to get our head around that a bit more, would be very useful. And one question I had as well that maybe you can respond to now is, within that, I mean, how important was and is, I guess was sort of the peak of the Black Lives Matter movement, which, if I'm getting the dates right, I mean, that's sort of was the strongest perhaps around 2020, right? So like right in the midst of the pandemic, you know, crisis and restrictions and stuff as well. Because I guess in my head that was sort of very central in the changes in understanding and radicalization in the United States. But your presentation went through, you know, a whole, just so many different factors, some of the changes in bourgeois politics and I guess the other campaigns as well. So yeah, that's my question.
Those are good questions. I mean, I'll share some materials now, like just off the top of my head. We have, as party instruments of communication and just dissemination and agitation, we have Liberation News, liberationnews.org. People will go into, there's all sorts of articles there. And then we have Liberation School. And Liberation School has actual materials for folks to be able to engage in collective study. And so those are there. We have comrades who are in the communications world and have developed different podcasts and media projects. So Breakthrough News is one of them. And the Socialist Program, which happens to be also part of Breakthrough News, is also you can go on Spotify and get it on podcast as well on YouTube. So those are some. Then the People's Forum, which is its own entity, which I co-founded, is an organization that has political education offerings. There's all sorts of book releases. There's lectures. I mean, the best number of events and hybrid things that we have are just crazy. So you go on YouTube and look for the People's Forum, and you'll find a whole bunch of different lectures and materials there. And in terms of like, we have, just for your sake, in terms of like some of the infrastructure that we've developed, we have newsletters that go on to our membership monthly from the national PSL, but kind of recuperating a lot of the summation of the work of the different branches. And that is basically called the Party Organizer. And the Party Organizer is basically some sort of reflection that allows comrades to see across the different branches and see the breadth of the work. And so that's something that could potentially be useful at some point with what you are thinking in the development of things. In terms of, you know, the trajectory of struggle in this country, I mean, Black Lives Matter goes back to 2013 with the killing of Trayvon Martin by vigilante in Florida. It's Ferguson. And it's also a reality that Black Lives Matter nationally, its leaders, the folks that started the movement, have been compromised. There's been a lot of cooptation of that movement that has happened. And there's also been the implosion of different chapters of Black Lives Matter because of the lack of political orientation. It's not enough to say, we believe that all Black lives matter, but what does that mean in the context of capitalism and having an Obama? What does that mean in the context of capitalism and having Black people who don't care about other Black people because they're poor? And so saying that is not enough if we're not taking into consideration the state. And what has happened, again, is a co-optation of many of the Black and brown organizations that has happened, that have come out without a clear political orientation, without deep understanding of what the proposal is. If we're standing against mass killings of people and we're standing against incarceration and policing, we need to stand against the capitalist state. And that doesn't necessarily always kind of is a given for people organizing in those spaces. And so it was essential to the consciousness of people to have that affirmation. I think it had a huge role, just like Occupy had a huge role in 2011, where people were able to capture the words, 99% versus 1%. That was easy enough for people to understand. Ideologically and culturally, it does have an impact. But in terms of people's kind of like deepening of class consciousness, there's more work to be done in that area. And so I didn't mention it, but definitely had an impact. 2020 was different because 2020, people had already gone through Ferguson in 2014. People had already gone through Trayvon Martin. The Black Lives Matter movement was there, but not a lot of people actually kind of vibed with it anymore because of all the co-optation and the leadership and all these different issues surrounding that. And so the George Floyd uprisings were a different thing. People were not talking about Black Lives Matter because Black Lives Matter had been co-opted, so much so that people were buying T-shirts at Target. I don't know if y'all have Target over there. Hopefully you don't. But shit. Well, imperialism. But again, it was like, it's a reality. It happens with many movements, right? That the anti-war movement was co-opted. Like a lot of leaders are sometimes co-opted. And so obviously it had a significant influence in the consciousness of people. A lot of them became radicalized through that concept and through that understanding. And it had to go to a process of getting to George Floyd and George Floyd being killed in Minneapolis in 2020 for being poor. After many different other struggles for people to say, this shit is different. This is no longer about affirming this. Like, this is a whole state. And now, in this moment, with what happened in 2020, with everything that's happened in the 4 years with Biden, people are actually in a point where they're saying, the IOF and the police departments are the same thing because they're trained in the same way. So US imperialism, as is acting in Gaza, is acting at home. And the more experience people have with struggle, the more deepening of their consciousness, the more clarity there is. And I think that we're in a space where there's definitely much more clarity with folks that have kind of gone through the trajectory of Ferguson, of George Floyd, and now. I see the question, the CP's question, right?
Yeah, CP's question.
What is and are the connections of the war in Ukraine and Russia and the war in the Middle East, the genocide in Gaza, and the expansion of the conflict to the Lebanon and Iran? Is this also connected to the driver they use? I mean, it's rooted in the same US imperialist project. And so, it's US hegemony. The United States is seeing themselves at a loss with the development of China and the ways in which China has been able to stand on its own 2 feet and develop relationships with other parts of the world. They are afraid of Russia and the relationship of Russia and China and the BRICS, and the fact that the global South is finally saying, we've had enough and we're trying to build our own path. And that is scary for colonizers. That's scary for US imperialism. And yes, obviously there is a connection between what's happening in Ukraine and the Middle East. I mean, NATO is the similarities. NATO is what Israel is in the Middle East, what NATO is in its region. Israel is what AFRICOM is Israel is what the Southern Command is. Like, Israel is a colonial state that serves the purpose of precisely expanding war. And not only in the Middle East, across the world. That is their purpose. And so I think, again, a lot of people are coming to that consciousness. There's still obviously heavy propaganda in the United States against China. There's heavy propaganda against communism in general when you have, Trump basically call Harris a Marxist and expect that to be some sort of like insult. We've had to defend our title and say she's not a Marxist. Well, but it's still, the anti-communism here in this country is like its second religion. And so there's heavy propaganda, but we are definitely in a different moment, which offers us a lot of opportunities as folks that are organizing and are attempting to move this country towards a socialist future. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of fragmentation. And there's a whole population of people who are aware that the political and economic system aren't working, but they're not organized. And so it will take more than the Party for Socialism and Liberation. It will take many organizations understanding our task and actually engaging in it. And that's what we're trying to do, to activate those forces and contribute to building that independent movement of working class people towards socialism. So we have lots of work to do, but we're hopeful.
Thank you so much. That's a really excellent note to finish on, I think. Thank you so much again for joining us today. Thanks everyone in the Zoom for coming as well. I'll resend the link for our Vijay Prashad tour coming up at the end of October. Best of luck for the rest of the campaign, and I'm sure we'll keep following online. And yeah, thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you all. And I'll definitely share whatever comes out of our space. With Dennis, I have your info, and Sam, I'll make sure you all get it. Good luck to you. And I'm very excited about all the work that Red Ant is going to be doing in Australia. You better let us know what's up.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Claudia.
All right, comrades. Have a good night. Well, have a good day. I'm going to have a good night. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, y'all.